This is Lviv on June 23rd. This chapter of the upcoming book is called The Shield of Europe, Notes from Ukraine. And this is one of the chapters, a relatively short one. Just decided to read it here as I sit in a quiet spot. Beautiful city, Lviv, by the way. So this chapter is called The Collapse of Russia. I'm looking at my notes here. I wrote it in Kyiv on June 8th. Russia is a nation seemingly in an acute state of nihilistic breakdown. Russian civilians seem not to care, not just about Ukraine or Ukrainians, but about the Russian soldiers losing their lives there, the Russian generals, colonels, and other officers dying there, the destruction of the Russian economy, the destruction of the Russian military. They don't seem to mind being lied to relentlessly. They don't seem to object to a spiritual leader who comes out in support of a war in which rape and murder and looting are military tactics. Are they giving us a glimpse into the future? Is this what a meaningless society will come to be? Is this how people who've been bludgeoned into compliance by bad leadership end up? Or is it anything other than the nihilistic coldness that's the exception? Towards the end, in the death throes of the Soviet Union in the late 1980s and early 90s, they seemed to sprout out of the ground, to come out of hiding and up from underground. Dissidents, artists, scientists, people who'd spent decades in penniless exile or prison, or some combination of the two, strong and fearless and intelligent moral voices. From them, you knew how this nation of Russia had produced its Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, its Chekhov and Gogol. Back came Solzhenitsyn from exile to spend his final days in his beloved mother Russia. Outsiders hoped or wanted to hope that the Soviet period had been the exception and the anomaly, a bad mistake that had brought this basically decent people and nation to hardship and disaster. Now, 30 years later, such thinking seems naive and foolish. The brief breath of freedom and democracy, it may turn out, was the exception for a dying civilization. That class of courageous dissidents has left the scene as surely as the hopefulness of the time, replaced by what they have now, so pathetic by comparison. The Russian government, using mid-20th century propaganda and oppression, the Russian military fighting a mid-20th century, if not medieval, war, the public propagandists seemingly tripping over each other to see who can say the stupidest, most outlandish thing, to see who can be the biggest cheerleader for nuclear war and the end of everything. I recently heard one of these Putin stooges say that all Americans are like mentally handicapped 6-year-olds, which, come to think of it, is something that a mentally handicapped 6-year-old might say. Here and there, amid the cacophony of the internet, from within Russia itself, one hears timid, tentative voices, themselves seemingly pathetic. They seem not to realize that their quiet pipings are actually more powerful than the bombast of the official media, than the showy parades with massive missiles, more powerful even, at least potentially, than the missiles and tanks that have been deployed against Ukraine. They may or may not realize that from their ranks, a future Russian society will have to be rebuilt if Russia will have a future. Those who grew up and lived for far too long under the Soviet Union are leaving the scene. The little thugs who rule with nostalgia for Soviet times Their days are numbered. Their public Putin puppets and Putin whores and goons and mouthpieces will disappear into obscurity. Another hopeful time awaits. That or nothingness. Lviv, June 23rd.